Has your scheme for world domination failed? Call 1-800-WILY-BTFO. We can help. And welcome back to Fair Game. I'm Jaimas, and this is episode 8 of our Megaman Soccer Run, in which we're going to be going after Dustman. The final one of the initial 8 Robot Masters, Dustman is arguably the toughest of the set. He's also kind of an anomaly because his slower speed and relatively unspectacular stats can easily lead one to suspect that he's not all that great. He's got the same speed as Needleman, he's got 64 kick power like Needleman, but he's only got 96 tackle, which is the same as Megaman, Bombman, and so on. What makes Dustman desirable is the fact that despite this, he has the third highest defense stat in the entire game, with only Woodman and Dr. Wily being any higher. Assuming that Dustman gets lucky with the rolls, it can take upwards of 3 or 4 attempts to steal from him depending on which Robot Master you're trying to use. And while you do have at least a decent chance of stealing with the likes of Cutman or Fireman, you're going to find that Electman actually has a lot of trouble doing so. Because of this, it actually helps a lot to front-load your team specifically to combat him. It's actually for this reason that when taking him on, I actually recommend going after Dustman last. I know a lot of people actually swear by getting him first since he's not exactly that hard and not especially good at tackling, but he's actually of really limited utility against the Robot Masters that you fight in the main campaign. Of these, he's really only useful against Skullman, Electman, Anchor, and Protoman, so 2 of them are ones that you're going to be facing after the initial 8 anyway. He's of very limited use against Woodman and Fireman, whose tackling stats are so high that they can still reliably steal from him. And he's not all that great against Cutman or Fireman because both of them also outrun him on top of being able to reliably tackle him. There's a good argument to be made that Dustman is still a relatively interesting Robot Master, even with a kind of weird stat loadout in this game. On top of being one of Roll's favorite Robot Masters, since, he's a trash disposal robot, Dustman is actually drawn by the guy who now does One Punch Man. This was done for the Robot Master contest in Japan. At the time, the artist was about 12. In accordance with the rule of logic I laid down last time, Dustman only appeared in 1 episode of the Ruby Spears Megaman cartoon. It wasn't a particularly notable appearance either, so there you go. Dustman only appeared in a couple of other games, specifically Mega Man 3 on Game Boy and Rockman the Power Fighters. A running gag with Dustman is that he almost never uses his arm cannon despite having one. In Mega Man 4, he tries to draw you nearer using his vacuum pack, and he also uses the vacuum pack for launching his Dust Crusher. Interestingly, his special shot in Mega Man Soccer actually uses his Dust Crusher in an entire new way. In the original, it surrounded a bomb with scrap metal and then lobbed it at the opponent. In Mega Man Soccer, it loads an entire shell full of scrap metal and just spews it all over the place on impact. The resulting shot, as a result, just buries the target Robot Master under a gigantic hill of debris. It's a comparatively effective super shot, and I know for a fact that Skullman can't block it. Pharaoh and Woodman don't seem to be able to either. Unfortunately, Dustman's stage is kinda crappy. The music for it is kinda bad, and it's basically a reskin of Electman's stage, complete with the Wily Lab Zero emblem all the way at the top. There is a sort of interesting quirk going on with every Robot Master that happens to use a Wily Lab as their stage, however. Every single Robot Master that happens to be fighting on this particular stage has a Wily on their team in League mode. I'm really unable to say whether that's clever or just laziness on the part of the programmers to use the same stage multiple times with minor palette swaps. Maybe a bit of both, really. Relatively recently, I played through almost every Mega Man Classic game. Usually a tradition Neil does, but I decided to give it a shot myself. One of the things I don't like about Mega Man 4 jumped out at me when I was playing it, which is, namely, every single boss in the castle stages is vulnerable to either the Ring Boomerang Dust Crusher or both. Now, this is far from the only game in the series to do this. Mega Man 6 rather notoriously does similar, with a lot of bosses being specifically vulnerable to the Silver Tomahawk. It's actually kind of ironic because while I give Mega Man 2 a lot of crap, specifically for the Boo Beams trap, and that is an unforgivably bad boss fight, practically every Mega Man game has some kind of gigantic screw-up that falls into the same category. Mega Man 1 has the Yellow Devil, a boss which, to the best of my knowledge, almost nobody has done the fair way. I know it's entirely possible to beat him the fair way. I've done it. The problem is that that boss does not make it worth it to do so. Almost every hit from this boss does insane amounts of damage, and it will very easily hit you because this is the game before the slide became available. It's also before the invention of E-Tanks. The Pew Beams trap for Mega Man 2 I consider to be a violation of the Geneva Conventions. Mega Man 3 makes up for comparatively lackluster boss fights by spamming the bejesus out of them. After the initial 8 Robot Masters, you then have to face the 4 Dock Robot stages, where you face basically 2 Robot Masters in each. Mega Man 4 throws an entire second castle into the mix, something that Mega Man 5 does as well, and both games do the same thing in that they don't give you the ability to go get E-Tanks again. So you have to use them sparingly lest you suddenly find yourself caught out mid-stage without the ability to get more. Mega Man 7's last boss, of course, was intended to be the last one in the series, and as such, KJ Inafune said, you know what, let's just make it ridiculously hard for no reason. Mega Man 8 is the same way, though not quite as difficult, with the biggest problem in the game being that you have no ability to actually get E-Tanks in Mega Man 8. Instead, you have to rely on the rush item drop, which is freaking awful, and may or may not drop enough health pickups for you to actually use. Looking back on Mega Man Classic, I'm actually kind of forced to reevaluate which one I would consider the best one, because there's 3 games in the series that I consider to be generally the best and for very, very different reasons. I know I listed 4 as probably my favorite earlier, but hear me out on this one. 4 I would generally consider to be one of the better games in the series as far as balance is concerned. However, while it has certainly a lot of content, it's also kind of threadbare around the edges, if you can believe it. You don't need the wire adapter and balloon adapter when you already have the rush coil. And while Mega Man 4 has some of the best weapons in the series, it also has the skull barrier, which is one of the worst shields. In that regard, I kind of like Mega Man 5 more. In addition to having Robot Masters that I genuinely like a little bit better, all of its special weapons are rather unique and usually have some interesting quirks all their own. I mean, alright, Mega Man 5 does give us the Power Stone, which is kind of mediocre at best, and it also gives us the Gravity Hold, which is probably the worst of the hits everything on screen weapons. But practically every other weapon in the game is a gem in its own right. Even the Charge Kick for all of its problems. Mega Man 5 also introduces the Super Arrow, which is actually a pretty interesting special weapon. The Super Arrow is a combination weapon/mobility tool that you pick up in Starman stage. Traditionally, you stick the arrows to walls and then you can jump up on them as platforms. It gives you effectively the ability of the Carry, Item 1, or the Balloon Adapter, but with slightly more expediency, and ergo lets you play around with it a little bit more. It's also a weapon in and of itself, and as I recall, actually the vulnerability of the last boss. You can even plunk it down and then ride it, though this will consume its energy in a matter of seconds if you do. Mega Man 5 also introduces Beat, and is the exact last time that Beat is ever useful. Mega Man 6, much like Mega Man 4 before it, gives you a lot of options that are actually genuinely useful, and a lot of opportunities to use all of them. Really, the only weapon in the game that's all that bad is the Plant Barrier. Except in Mega Man 6, the Plant Barrier has a unique feature where it will basically destroy any enemy that's otherwise shielded, like a shielded Matul or a shield attacker. And while this isn't quite enough to push it into the same realm of utility as, say, the Leaf Shield, this still makes it pretty useful. The only other boss weapon I really take issue with in the game is the Yamato Spear, which frankly needs a lot more ammo. If you were to fix that issue and give the Blizzard attack maybe 50% more ammo as a result, yeah, you'd have a pretty good weapon loadout here. I think, honestly, one of the biggest problems people have with Mega Man 6, aside from the fact that the series was starting to get saturated by that point, is how much it takes out as opposed to how much it puts in. Mega Man 7 fundamentally changes how Beat works, and not for the better. While he goes after enemies the exact same way he does in Mega Man 5, he kills them in one hit, consuming energy based on how difficult they were to kill, and he's completely useless against bosses. So if you use Beat to take out a medium-level enemy, oh, he'll do it, but he's going to consume the entire energy gauge to do so. Mega Man 6 also removes the Rush Coil, Rush Marine, and Rush Jet. And while nobody used the Rush Marine, simply because it was too situational, the other two were actually actively used. Instead, Rush is used for both the Jet and Power adapters, which, while very interesting and add a whole new take on how Mega Man is used, both really have their own problems in gameplay. They're infinitely reusable, sure, and they're quite powerful in their own right, but it honestly feels like you kind of lose something in the transition from being able to use Classic Rush to having to use these adapters. I think that's honestly why they tried to strike a middle ground with it in Mega Man 7, where you got the Super Adapter, which combined the two. And no joke, I really love the Super Adapter. All in all, it's actually really hard for me to say which of the Mega Man Classic games, at least the first 6, is my favorite one of them. If we're including fan works, then probably Mega Man 8-Bit Deathmatch, but that's just me being a jackass. Considering that the game is basically a gigantic mega mix of the entire series where you play as your own original character, Do Not Steal. I honestly kind of love it for what it is. And while some of the boss fights can be outright bull squid, it's still a pretty good game. Definitely earns itself the Jaimas seal of approval. You know, it's kind of funny. If you're a retro gamer, the original Mega Man Legacy Collection is practically like a treasure trove for you. since it has all the first 6 games all there and ready for you to go. Granted, the second edition is still a pretty good deal if you happen to like Mega Man. For other fan games, I can definitely recommend Mega Man 2.5D. That's a damn good game. I've heard that Mega Man Unlimited is okay, but I've also heard that it has a lot of problems, and since I haven't played the game myself, I have no way of verifying either. It's actually kind of remarkable just how many fan works and official works this series has. I'd say a big reason for it is the fact that Capcom virtually never C&Ds ongoing fan projects. The series is remarkably consistent save for a few crappy bosses here and there. And of course the errant oddity like the one we're playing right now. As you can see, Dustman's stats are actually making him kind of a difficult fight for us right now. Like, we're still kicking his butt, but it's nowhere near as much of a slam dunk as it otherwise would be. One thing to note is that if you ever try the I'm going to shoot from the goal to the goal trick, half the time your teammates are going to screw that up due to their own AI. As you just witnessed. Traditionally, I do a lot better than this, but Dustman is not exactly someone you can take lightly, as you can see. Now here's a question for all my viewers. What would you say is the worst boss in Mega Man Classic? Practically every Mega Man Classic game has what I refer to as that one boss. Mega Man 1 has the Yellow Devil, Mega Man 2 has the Boo Beam Trap, Mega Man 3 has the Copy Robot Battle, depending on your own personal hatred for it. 4 has Matul Daddy, Mega Man 5 has Cirque Ring Q9, and of course the Wily Press. Mega Man 6 doesn't really have anything like that, but the Power Piston and of course the X Crusher are both kind of obnoxious. Mega Man 7 has the completely unforgivable last boss. Mega Man 8, of course, has that one Wily Tower boss where you have to use the Mega Ball and nothing but. Mega Man in Base has pretty much all of the King robots. And there's also ones like the last boss of Dr. Wily's Revenge, which is pretty much a violation of any human rights standard. I know we tend to go positive in this show, but go ahead and leave your theory in the comments on which one's the worst. If I get enough response, I may actually do a video on it at some point. While he's not a Wily Castle boss, I know a lot of people would argue that Burner Man certainly belongs on that list. Since he has insane damage output, is actually kind of resistant to his weakness weapon, and is actually really hard to avoid because of how quick he moves. You know, it's kind of funny, that one boss syndrome isn't really something that popped up too often in the Mega Man X series. The X series doesn't really have any bosses that fall into the territory of complete nonsense difficulty like the Mega Man Classic bosses did. I wonder why that is. Maybe it's because they started so much later, and thus they had so much more experience to pull from on that one. But then again, Mega Man 7 came out almost a year after Mega Man X2, and we were right back to business with the final boss on that one. And then 8 had that ridiculous boss with the freaking Mega Ball, so yeah, there's something going on with the Classic series specifically. All I can gather is that someone is mandating that we have a couple of periodic insane bosses that make no logical sense but are insanely difficult. Come to think of it, even the Classic series fan games tend to do this crap. Mega Man 8-Bit Deathmatch kind of does this with both the Darkman and Base fights, but I was able to beat both without cheating, so yeah, that's not a problem. I'll need to consult both Neil and Cam about Mega Man 2.5D and see if there's any crazy bosses in that, and maybe Jaina later for the purposes of discussing Unlimited on that regard. Because I'm like 90% certain that this is something that's almost exclusively tied to the Mega Man Classic series at this point. Since we are discussing the Mega Man Classic series at the moment, we may as well also discuss one of my favorite oddities of Mega Man 6. Splash Woman was in fact not the first female robot master in the series. Or at least not conceptually. During development, Centaur Man was originally conceived as a female character. This is actually referenced in, of all things, the official manga, where during a fight with him, Mega Man manages to knock off Centaur Man's helmet, revealing that, indeed, it's actually a Centaur woman. And while part of that is ambiguous, what's not ambiguous is that Centaur Man's appearance actually kind of supports that theory, since Centaur Man's always wearing that big bulky horn helmet. That also means that the first 2 female robot masters in the entire series were monster girls, and I don't know how to feel about that. That said, I have always thought that Centaur Man was a really cool design. Like, it's really easy to see that certain robot masters are based off a certain chassis, for example, Needleman being based off Airman's design. And then you just have Centaur Man, who frankly doesn't look like anyone else. Hold on a second, I gotta check something on this. God damn it, Internet, of course you did this. Look up the female version of Centaur Man from the manga, find dozens of pages of Rule 63 porn. I openly acknowledge I brought this upon myself. Still, the internet doing what it usually does aside, that actually portrays the rather unusual relationship that Centaur Man had with Nightman in an entirely new light. In the official manga, the pair was rather close, and Centaur Man was enraged when Nightman was defeated by Megaman. If this is actually true, then that would also mean that their relationship may have been more than simply professional. And also means that Nightman is a gentleman both on and off the battlefield, if you get what I mean, and I think you do. No, the land of 10,000 nopes, we are not going further down this particular avenue in this particular episode. This nonsense has gone quite far enough without getting into Robot Master sexual politics. Though apparently like a third of Centaur Man's fan art on Pixiv to this day portrays Centaur Man as female. I can't even say if this is a good or a bad thing characterization-wise. See, the ambiguity over Centaur Man's gender is something that's kind of a hilarious thing, because it's only suggested in the manga itself. But there's nothing against it in the official works. So that could potentially still be legit, and none of us would know, barring a statement from Capcom on it. And given how deep this rabbit hole has gone already, can you blame Capcom in the slightest for not getting involved in it? Holy crap, the match is over. Oh god, I beat him 8-2. And with that, we get a Dustman for our team, and we are done with the initial 8 Robot Masters. Which means it's time to start going after Wily. If you guys wonder why I keep letting you see the passwords, it's because frankly I want you guys to be able to follow along if you want to. Also so that if, God forbid, the worst happens and I have a computer crash or something, I have the ability to easily pick back up and play from where I was leaving off. Also, good God, the intro for the Wily Castle stages in Mega Man Soccer is probably one of the most zero-effort things I have ever seen in a Mega Man game. Look at this, it's the 8-bit model but with a 16-bit color palette. Interestingly, Skull Fortress in the Mega Man cartoon was actually based on the one from Mega Man 5, with some references to the one from Mega Man 3, for good measure. The one that's actually in this game is probably closest to Mega Man 3's. Anyway, thank you for tuning into Fair Game, and stay tuned for next episode.